the California State Senate, and this is a joint hearing. I have with me Senator Wolk, who's chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Resources, Environmental Protection, and Energy and Transportation, and I'm Jim Bell, chair of the Senate Transportation Housing Committee. We're having an overview hearing on the 2016 draft business plan for the high-speed rail, and we'd like to further acknowledge representatives of the High-Speed Rail Authority, the legislative analyst, and a peer review group that has reviewed the plan. And I really want to appreciate all the work everybody's done to prepare for this hearing today. We also have representatives of Caltrain, Metrolink, and LA Metro. Thank you for being here also. Today's hearing is a joint hearing of our subcommittee number 2 on the business plan for high-speed rail as drafted in 2016. And we're going to hear plenty of from our panelists regarding the draft business plan. However, I want to say I look forward to hearing from the authority and the local transportation agencies on how monies will be used to fund our rail connectivity projects along the high-speed rail corridor, and also from the authority on the rationale behind using the cap and trade dollars out until 2050. The construction of the high-speed rail project is a monumental task, and the High-Speed Rail Authority has a lot of work ahead of them. And additionally, we all know there will be challenges on the way. And for example, challenges associated with external delays to the project, such as the ongoing lawsuits to the project, have driven up cost as the project completion dates are pushed out. If the construction of this project is to be kept moving forward and be successfully completed, not only is the High-Speed Rail Authority, but we, the legislature, as well as the administration, all have a part in addressing these challenges and making the projects a success. As chairman of the Transportation and Housing Committee, I look forward to working with both the High-Speed Rail Authority and administration and addressing these challenges. Now, we're going to hear 3 panels today. The first will be the High-Speed Rail Authority. The second panel will consist of the legislative analysts and the peer review group. And the third panel will consist of local transportation agencies from various areas of California. And I'll ask all the panelists to come back at the end of testimony, provide the committee with additional opportunity to ask all panelists more questions. So at the end of all the panelists, I want everybody to sit at the table. We can ask questions. I also want to note that I tend to keep this hearing moving in a timely manner, and I want to provide adequate time for both the panelists and those wishing to comment during public comment period to have sufficient time. Thank you for everybody coming today and on a Monday morning. And I'll turn it over to my co-chair on this panel, Senator Wolk, for her opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Bell. And those of you that are here today, I appreciate your participation, and I'm looking forward to the number of questions that need to be answered. Certainly when the voters approved this project, the time between that and the first vote to approve funds for the project in the Senate and the legislature in 2012, I became somewhat skeptical of the plan for building the project and, frankly, the ability of the authority to manage the project. Nonetheless, I support high-speed rail. I think that there's an importance to this for the state of California. Here we are in 2016, and now there's another fundamental change in terms of timing and direction, which has to do with building a northern initial operating segment. And that appears to be based on a more recent analysis of the funding available and the time necessary to bring any initial operating segment online. I very much support the change in direction, and I understand the implications of that. But I think that when there were legislative critics in 2012, one of their suggestions was, in fact, let's look at the segments that could provide ridership and success earlier on, and that would be a preferable way of moving forward, and I think they were proven right. The issue of cap and trade dollars is a serious one to me as chair of Budget Sub2, and I know the rest of my colleagues on that, Senator Nielsen, one of them, and Senator Pavley. It's something that we've talked about, and we are concerned about the cap and trade dollars, their ability to stand up to further challenge in this area. So I'm really looking forward to today to get to take a further look at the business plan and the funding and get some answers today. So thank you again for coming, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll turn it over to our High-Speed Rail Authority for their presentation of the business plan. So we have Dan Richard, Chair. Welcome, Dan. And Jeff Morales, the Chief Executive Officer. I'll turn it over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Bell, Chairperson Wolk, honorable members of this committee. My name is Dan Richard. I'm the chair of the High-Speed Rail Authority Board. With me is our CEO, Jeff Morales. We're going to give you a very brief overview today, and per your request, we do have a brief PowerPoint. We'd like to leave as much time as possible for questions and colloquy, so we're going to hit this pretty quickly and at high level. I guess, where do I point this? Okay, do you mind helping me with? As was noted, this is our 2016 business plan, and just to remind you, the business plan is required by statute. The legislature has required that we provide every 2 years a business plan that talks about the status of the project and a number of factors, including costs and risks, and we have endeavored to do that. As we'll indicate, this is a draft business plan, and again, that's per the statute, to give the public and the legislature an opportunity to review it and to comment. We'll be submitting the final version to you by the statutory deadline of May 1. As we say here, it is a foundational document for implementing the program, and it does talk about our progress over the last several years, and including the approach to using funds. And let me just say one thing about progress. Chair Wolk mentioned that she had some skepticism in 2012 about the ability of the authority to deliver the project. In 2012, I shared that skepticism. And at that time, when we came in and we took over this program, it only had half the people that the legislature had authorized for 2 years. It didn't have a chief risk officer. It didn't have a number of key positions. All of that has turned around. We now have a fully functioning organization of both a lean organization of state employees as well as contractors. And we're happy to get into the details, but I can tell you sitting here today that the biggest change over the last several years has been the change in the organization's growth, maturity, and ability to deliver this, and in particular with some very sophisticated tools, and I think you'll hear some of this if you ask the peer review group in terms of our approach to ridership and risk analysis and things like that. So there are more details about that in the plan, but Madam Chair, since you raised this, I wanted to address that question. The other big news in terms of progress over the last 2 years is we are now in construction building America's first true high-speed rail system. That itself has changed the dynamic quite significantly. This plan does have updated ridership forecasts and cost estimates. It talks about the next milestones and so forth. And it talks about what we can deliver with existing funds that either are in hand or have been allocated to us, and obviously there are some assumptions there that we're all aware of. Turning next to the plan itself, because this is a combination of a fiscal overview as well as a programmatic overview, I would like to start with one bit of good news, which is that this is a very expensive project, as you know, but our current projections have actually brought the cost of the project down by about $5.5 billion over what we estimated 2 years ago. Now, it really went from about $68 billion to about $62 billion, But looking at those savings, we have reinvested $2 billion to upscope the project in Southern California in the corridor between Burbank, Los Angeles, and Anaheim. That's a very important corridor. It will form the basis for ultimate high-speed rail service there. There's currently freight rail as well as Metrolink service there. There are a number of things that should happen in that corridor, and we now think that we can put additional tracks and other upgrades in there. So went from 68 to 62 with a rescoping upwards to make it a $64 billion program. And I should point out that that's denominated in fully inflated year of expenditure dollars, which is somewhat unusual for projects. Most projects talk to you only in terms of current year dollars. Not to pat ourselves on the back, because you require us to give you both current year as well as fully inflated year of expenditure dollars, and we have done that in this business plan. As was noted by Chairman Bell and by Chair Wolk, the big change is in the sequencing, and I use that word deliberately and emphatically. We're not leaving anybody behind. Our mission is to do exactly what the public asked for in 2008 in Proposition 1A, which is to build a fully electrified, high-speed system that is designed to achieve transit from downtown Los Angeles to downtown San Francisco in no more than 2 hours, 40 minutes, and to be able to operate without an operating subsidy, as other high-speed rail systems in the world do. That is still our mission. That is still what we're doing. What we are presenting to you is our thought that the best way to achieve that ultimate goal is to resequence and to look at what we call the valley-to-valley line from Central Valley to Silicon Valley. Now, let me just take a moment and go back to some of the earlier business plans that we had. As was alluded to before, in 2012 and in 2014, it was our view that starting in the Central Valley, which those were the cards that were given to us when we came in, that the best thing to do was to build south to connect to Los Angeles. And in a totally unconstrained world, that still might make sense because there's more population and therefore higher ridership to the south, and it costs more. And if it costs more, it makes some sense to build it first to deal with inflationary effects. However, we looked at basic math. The most important thing for this program at this point is to get operational service up and running that's consistent with the Bond Act. That means meeting all the provisions of the Bond Act and operating without a subsidy. Operating without a subsidy means that we open up the opportunity for private sector investment. They're looking for that first operating line. So the basic math was it would take about $30 billion to connect the Central Valley to Los Angeles. It would take about $20 billion to connect the Central Valley to the Silicon Valley. That $20 billion investment could open up $8 to $10 billion of private sector investment, and it made sense to do that first. And that was the genesis. It's not because the mountains are too high, because we're going to go over those mountains anyway. It's not because of other difficulties. It's simply that with the available dollars that we have in hand or allocated to us, that's a system we can get up and running for the people of California. And it's a system that not only is self-sustaining, but has real meaning in terms of the connection of two very important economic regions of our state. Silicon Valley, which is plagued with housing limitations, and the Central Valley, which is plagued with persistent underinvestment and lack of economic diversity. So it is something that's meritorious and something that we can do. We can have it operational by 2025, and it would connect with the current southern terminus of our construction in the Central Valley to San Jose. And then, because of the work that we're doing with our partners at Caltrain, we would be able, through their electrification program that we're participating in, to get trains all the way into San Francisco. Now, one of the things that has received some commentary is that the southern terminus of where we're currently building right now is north of Bakersfield. And for a lot of people, it would make more sense to go all the way into Bakersfield. For us, it would make more sense to go all the way into Bakersfield. It's about an additional 20, 22 miles, and the cost of that plus upgrading between San Jose and San Francisco, which would really give us an excellent level of service there, would be another $2.9 billion. As I indicated, we're presenting to you in this draft plan what we feel we have the funds to build with dollars in hand or currently allocated. The $2.9 billion is in excess of that, but it still makes sense. That $2.9 billion of additional investment would generate $4.7 billion of ridership revenue, which would translate into an equivalent amount of additional private sector interest. So what we've said in our draft business plan is that we think that it's meritorious to seek federal funding to help close that gap. We're not foolish. We know what the environment has been, but we think that that we'll have a different conversation with the Congress when we're showing both that we have an operating system, that it operates without a subsidy, that we have private sector interest, and that link closing would generate substantially more revenue and public benefit than the cost. If for some reason we don't get that, we can still operate the system and it can still be rational, but that would be a better system and a preferred way to go, and we will continue to seek those funds. At the same time that we're looking at this first operating segment from the Central Valley to the Silicon Valley, we know it's important not only in terms of equity, but also for policy reasons, to make parallel important investments in Southern California. And I mentioned before the corridor between Burbank, Los Angeles Union Station, and Anaheim. There are immediate investments that can and should be made in that corridor. Mr. Morales is going to go into more detail on those, but those investments can have near-term benefits in terms of throughout the Southland, not just in that corridor because of the way that Metrolink and others operate, but also lays down the basis for future high-speed rail service there. And so together with our partners, and here I want to cite the strong leadership of Secretary Brian Kelly and the State Transportation Agency. Secretary Kelly is a huge believer in the statewide rail modernization, which after all, we're just part of a broader statewide rail modernization. And he has focused very heavily on that. The Secretary, Mr. Morales, and I have been meeting with Southern California transportation leaders to coordinate the timing and the scope of those investments, which we think are vitally important. And I already mentioned the extension to San Francisco and Bakersfield. So on the next chart, I've used the term that we can build this with revenues in hand or revenues that have been allocated to us. And let me just walk through what those are. First of all, thanks to the legislature, I see Senator Galgiani here, who was the author of Assembly Bill 3034 that put Proposition 1A on the ballot in 2008, and that measure provided for $9.95 billion of bond funding for high-speed rail and for connectivity projects. $950 million was for connectivity projects, and I would like to just point out that one of the things that Mr. Morales, Secretary Kelly, and I did in 2012 was to encourage our administration to release those funds. Two different administrations had held them back until they could see whether there was going to be a high-speed rail system. Those were very important funds for Amtrak upgrades, for commuter corridors, for BART car replacements, and for many other things. And those dollars have been flowing, and they flow from the high-speed rail program to those local agencies. And so that was an early promise that we made that we certainly did fulfill. So we have the bond funds, and the bond funds now, this legislature has appropriated $2.7 billion of those bond funds to be used to complete the Central Valley work. With other commitments, you also appropriated $500 million of those bond funds to fulfill a memorandum of understanding that we entered into with Southern California Transportation Partners, and $600 million of those bond funds for a separate MOU that we entered into for the Caltrain electrification program. Those appropriations have already been made. There's about $4.1 billion of unappropriated bond funds left. We have about $3.3 billion of federal money. You have also appropriated that through SB 1029 in 2012 so that we can use those funds for the Central Valley construction. We are doing that right now. And then the cap and trade proceeds. And let me just say this very quickly. We won't be able to go into much detail on cap and trade because we are, after all, simply a recipient agency. And the legislature has given us a continuous appropriation of 25% of cap and trade proceeds. And we're very aware that there's a question about the pendency of that program past 2020. I would only say two things to you. For purposes of our planning, we have been told to assume that because the state ARB has continuing regulatory authority, and because of other actions, frankly, that the legislature has taken, such as the passage of Senate Bill 9 last year, which passed near unanimously, and which contemplates cap and trade revenues after 2020. While we're aware of the dialogue, and we hope that that will be clarified for other reasons, our planning assumption is that it continues at this point. And there's not a whole lot we're able to tell you beyond that, but that is the assumption. With those proceeds, we would look at about $5 billion as pay-as-you-go monies, and then after 2022, we would be financing off of that to help accelerate the completion of the first operating leg. I just want to end my part of the presentation by not that I need to remind you, but I need to tell you that we are constantly reminded that what we're building has to be consistent with Proposition 1A. No operating subsidy, electric powered, connecting the major regions of the state, and being designed to achieve sustained speeds of 200 miles an hour with segment travel times that are listed. You know, we agreed in 2012 at the behest of members of this legislature and members of the Congress to consider the blended service. And I just want to end by dealing with one very strong misconception that's out there. We agreed to that, and frankly, it was recommended by the peer review group and others because the belief was that we could use the blended system in the urban areas and still meet these criteria of the Bond Act. We still believe that today. And if you're on high-speed trains coming into Paris, they're not going 200 miles an hour. They slow down in the urban areas. That was always the intent, even for California high-speed rail. The maps going back to 2008 show 120 miles an hour in the urban corridors. That was always the intention. And so we really have not, it is not true that using the blended system impairs our ability to meet Proposition 1A. And that is the reason that we are doing it, because it saves substantial money. So with that, thank you very much. We certainly look forward to answering your questions. I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague, our CEO, Mr. Morales. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, chairs and members of the committee. Chairman Richard has hit the key points. What I'm going to do is walk through some of the particulars in terms of how we develop this plan and how it'll be implemented going forward. And working within the constraints of the available funding and the conditions of 1A, we establish in this business plan three key fundamentals in terms of what will guide us going forward and what will guide the program going forward. And those are, first, to get into operations as soon as we can, and I'll talk more about why we want to do that. Second, to make as many concurrent investments throughout the state as possible, so that we can see incremental benefits happening near term for local services, and then ultimately it ties together to develop the full system. And then third, to complete all of the environmental work on the remaining segments statewide so that we are able to then move into construction on those segments as opportunities present themselves to do that. So let me talk first about getting into revenue operations. And as Chairman Richard noted, the key here is about initiating service, because we're not talking about an endpoint. We're talking about the first point at which we can meet all of the various criteria in 1A and be able to start revenue service. We've determined that we can do that based on all of the updated capital costs, the ridership modeling, all the other factors. Begin that at the southern terminus of our current contracts in the Central Valley and run north and west to San Jose to create the Central Valley to Silicon Valley connection. That cost is about approximately $20.7 billion in year of expenditure funds, which is available through the existing sources that we've spoken about. We have the environmental approvals underway for the sections outside of the Central Valley. Obviously, within the Central Valley, we have those environmental approvals, and that's the basis for the construction moving forward today. In this plan, we also describe the business model of how we will move forward now with the availability of a steady revenue stream through cap and trade. And the path going forward will be a series of large design-build contracts for the civil works for the remaining pieces, a major P3 or public-private partnership for the rail infrastructure, signals, communications, and then the procurement of rolling stock and all the other associated facilities. We also lay out in this plan the notion of bringing on an operator early in the process so that the operator, who will ultimately be the one responsible for meeting all the requirements of running and meeting the non-subsidy, can be a partner in those decisions as we go forward. When we talk about concurrent investments, it's important to note that those are, again, statewide, and that's consistent with the approach taken in the last few business plans and that embodied in the legislature's actions in 2012 for a statewide rail modernization program. So that includes the continued progress, and you'll hear more from Jim Hartnett from Caltrain, but we are a full partner in the Caltrain electrification project. In Northern California as well, working with ACE, the Altamont Commuter Express, as well as Capital Corridor, working on improvements and expansions, including getting ACE, the early work to get the ACE system to Modesto and Merced, where they will meet up with high-speed rail. And then, very importantly, in Southern California as well. And I want to focus just a little bit on that, the Burbank-Anaheim corridor and why that's so important. It's a 45-mile corridor that connects some of the most populated and key visitor tourist points, business points in the state. It's home to the second busiest Amtrak line in the country, the Low-Sand Corridor today, as well as extensive commuter rail services there and key freight routes as well. It's a key freight corridor. And so our plan there is to continue to work with our regional partners as well as the freight railroads to make near-term investments that create benefits there in the very near term and then ultimately get adopted into our system. One specific example, and you may hear more about this from Art Leahy coming up, but is a grade crossing project called the Rosecrans Marquardt grade crossing. It's the #1 PUC site in the state. Attacking that and separating it has huge implications. Just that one grade separation project will improve capacity for rail through the region by 60%. And that it will complete the triple tracking of freight, so huge implications for better freight movement there. It will dramatically improve the capacity on Metrolink's Inland Empire route, which goes to Riverside and San Bernardino counties. Would eliminate one of the PUC's very highest priorities, and of course has very significant implications in terms of local traffic and air quality in that region as well, because as trains move through there, you have extensive backup of traffic there that has real effects. These improvements can be made incrementally and all have independent utility in that they provide distinct benefits even before they're connected together as a full system. And so we're working closely with our partners to advance those projects. And they become, obviously, the building blocks ultimately for high-speed rail coming to Southern California. The third key fundamental is, again, to prepare to move the entire statewide system forward because Proposition 1A calls for a statewide system. That's what we're moving forward to develop. And so we are doing that. We have the environmental and preliminary engineering work underway on all of the remaining segments throughout the state. All of them moving forward now in conjunction with our partners at the Federal Railroad Administration and with the resource agencies. Our plan and the plan we're working against is to have all of those segments completed by the end of 2017 so that those segments could be able to move into construction. And that will allow us to adapt to changing circumstances, which we have seen throughout this program, and take advantage of opportunities as they present themselves. And this business plan makes it clear that we have the funds available to us to complete all of that environmental work as we go forward. Finally, in closing, let me just, as Chairman Richard noted, the plan is a draft. It's out for public comment now through April 18th. We have an upcoming board meeting in Anaheim next week, and then another one on April 21st in San Jose. The public can make comments there. The board will consider those comments and will finalize the business plan and submit it to the legislature by May 1, the required date in statute. And with that, we're happy to take questions.
Between the legislator and the panelists. So I'll ask that our high-speed rail peer group and the legislative analysts come forward and make their presentation now. Thank you, and sit at the table here, and appreciate you coming up. And then after that, we'll hear from the local agencies as well. So just sit around the table, or you could take off, or yeah. I think we have Jessica Peters, Principal Fiscal and Policy Analyst from the Legislative Analyst's Office with us, and Lou Thompson, Chair of the Peer Review Group. Is that correct, Lou? Yeah. So welcome. Lou, why don't you start, okay? And welcome.